Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to etcfo.com, which is a special vertical which covers the CFO community by the Economic Times. I'm glad to see all of you here. Last year, also, we carried a special series on budget in the month of January. Every Friday, we had a show at 2 o'clock, and the same we are doing this year as well. So, every Friday, we will have a show at 2 o'clock, and we will bring to you top CFOs of India Inc., along with the economists, policymakers, and the experts, industry experts, and try to explore their expectations specifically from the budget and what do they see that the finance minister is going to unveil on the 1st February while declaring or revealing the budget in the country. Uh, in this particular session, which is the first session, and I also, will try to introduce you to the speakers. But before that, let me tell you that there are two important themes or maybe trends that is happening right now in India or maybe the economy. At one side, unemployment is still stagnant. The reports or the numbers are not rising. The interest rates, the inflation is still not under control, and consequently, the interest rates will go up. That is on the economic side, and major challenge is the global economy has also going through major challenges. In fact, the Goldman Sachs says that the 1.8% will be the growth specifically for the world going ahead. This is on the economic side, and on the political side, it's going to be a real challenge for the government because next year is an election year. So, will government spend more? That is the challenge. That is the question. And that is the real question because at one side, there are economic challenges which will not allow government to spend more. But on the other side, there is a political question about the election. But here in the ETCFO series on the budget, we'll try to explore what is it that the CFOs want to see the economy at the next level? What is it that the industry experts want specifically for the CFO community and India Inc. as a whole? So let me introduce you to the speakers that we have for this particular session. My first speaker today is Kunal Kumar Kundu, the India economist of Societe Generale Corporate and Investment Bank. Kunal, glad to have you.
Thanks. Glad to be here as well. Thanks, Amol.
Sure. My next speaker is Mr. Samir Agrawal, the Group CFO, Manipal Health Enterprise. Samir, glad to have you.
Thank you, Amol. Glad to be online.
My next speaker is Mayank Gupta, CFO of CarDeco.com. Mayank, glad to have you.
Thanks, Amol. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And my next speaker is Chirag Mawani, CFO, The Soul Store. Chirag, glad to have you as well.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
Sure. So, gentlemen, the basic question that we all have right now is the budget expectation. What tone the finance minister will adopt, in which way or which direction the finance minister and specifically the government will take. So, let me learn it from all of you. And I will get into the first common question and then the specific questions. So, my common question to all of you is what is your checklist or what is it that you expect from the Union Budget 2023? And let me start from you, Kunal.
Yeah, thanks, Amol. So as you correctly pointed out, this will be, the last full budget before the general election. So one will necessarily witness a desire to maintain a tug of war between populism and prudence, especially in light of a rather weak labor market situation that again you have rightly mentioned. But in addition to that, we are seeing a lot of stress among the lower and lower middle income households. In terms of my expectations, I will eschew any talks about populism or any particular measures, uh, you know, uh, but I would talk about a few ones that I think ought to be there, and I'm quite confident should be there. These are not necessarily unrelated, but these will most likely provide a key signal about the economy and the way forward. So first is of course investment. But when I'm talking about investment, essentially what I'm talking about is infrastructure investment. I am actually particularly bullish about India's the investment cycle picking up specifically through the infrastructure cycle. I'm not too bullish about business investment picking up, at least in the short to medium term. I think it will be the infrastructure investment that will be driving India's overall investment cycle. The second thing that I would like to see is governments, clearly walking the talk through the budget about its green initiative. There have been a lot of discussions around India's ambitious targets, but what I would like to see budget laying down some specific ideas, and or strategies about improving India's EV infrastructure. That would eventually support both production and adoption of EVs, and of course a focused move towards green hydrogen. So these will not only be investment accretive, but will also help save India's precious forex reserves. The other important theme, of course, is the theme that usually plays out every time. It's about the balancing act between expenditure commitment and the revenue targets. Specifically, the challenge will be next year because of the sharply lower nominal GDP growth which India would likely see. So I would possibly say, the government may possibly target a fiscal deficit which is less than 6% next year compared to their target of 6.4% this year. But I do not see it going too much below 5.5 to 6%. As I said, there I would possibly see more of a balancing act between these two commitments. Apart from this, what I would like to see really is some simplification of the existing GST structure. Compliance remains quite onerous and costly, especially for the MSMEs, which are clearly struggling to survive, as multiple data points show. So these are some of the things I would really like to see in this budget.
Hmm.
So I'll
Sure,
stop here.
noted your points. Sure, noted your points. I think the point on EV infrastructure and hydrogen is really uncommon, and I think that's where in fact government should also focus on. Valid point, Kunal. Let me come to you, Samir, and take your perspective.
Thanks, Amol, and thanks for having me. Thanks, Kunal, for setting the baseline. It is, I think, so quite comprehensive. But apart from what Kunal said, which I fully agree, I think so. India is on the cusp of growth. Okay, India is on the cusp of greatness. I personally am very optimistic, especially because of what's happening in China. India has a great opportunity to really take the bull by the horn. Even though the growth of GDP is slowing down a bit because of what's happening globally, but still at 6.3, 6.4%, we will be the fastest growing economy in the world. I think so. The government will need, I know it's the election year, but I think so. Time and again, the government has sort of said of budget being a non event in a way. And I'm still expecting the government not to be too populist, but it has to walk the fine line between high inflation and also supporting growth. And supporting growth, and obviously, it's a very, very fine line. For example, the interest rates are rising. That needs to start tapering a bit for the capex cycle to come back. A lot of the volumes that were down pre-COVID, I think so, are touching higher than pre-COVID. We are seeing a lot of high automotive sales happening. A lot of consumption has come back. And one thing, it's very clear that we have a Make in India initiative that they have been talking about. A lot of PLI investments are coming through. I think so. It needs to be speeded up, and it can be speeded up. And I know in future we'll talk about ease of doing business, but decriminalization of laws, for example, simplifying the law structures, dispute resolutions, creating infrastructure for adding more investments into the country. I think that this is something that I really want to see how India can actually keep on growing, because the growth is the single biggest solution for all problems that we will have as a large country. We should not forget the middle class in the country. Sometimes we tend to forget them. We are probably more than 400 million Indians, which are the people who are actually driving consumption in the economy. And I hope, and Kunal didn't talk about all of us, but I really hope as a commoner, as a common middle income guy, that some benefits are given in terms of taxation, in terms of higher spends on healthcare, which I find that even the insurance policies people are still not buying. Maybe some incentives towards that will help more penetration of insurance policy and healthcare across the country. And probably the highest rate of tax for an individual is higher than corporate tax. So somewhere that needs to sort of moderate, because otherwise we'll start having exodus of a lot of the HNIs or ultra HNIs or even startups that are doing very well to set up shops in Singapore, UAE, Hong Kong, which has a much lower rate of tax. So at some point in time, we have to have we have to bridge the gap. We cannot expect brain drain. I think so. India is really at the cusp of fantastic next decade of growth, and we need the government will need to continue to support it without being too populous in any of the budgets now or going ahead to really get the benefit of all that. So Amol, that is my expectation from the budget this
Hmm,
time.
hmm, hmm. Sure, Samir. I think you listed out, quite a number of reforms or maybe the adventures that the government should, put in place so that things will really fall in place. On the Singapore and basically the ultra HN and taxation part is absolutely valid because we have seen a lot of people actually shifting to Singapore and Canada.
Yeah.
If they're going for a career and great opportunities, that's absolutely fine. But if they're going specifically for tax reform or maybe saving tax, I think then we should relook at the whole tax structure. So noted your point, Samir. Let me come to you, Chirag, and learn from a startup perspective. What is it that you expect from the government?
Sure. So thanks, Amol again. Uh, in my view, I think so. I like in 2014 also we didn't see any populous budget coming out. Uh, I don't expect one again here in this year as well. But what I feel is that for us, we've been talking about by 2047 we want to be called as a developed nation from developing nation. So in this journey from developing nation to developed nation, I think the MSME sector is going to play a very critical role. 95% or more than 95% of the companies today fall in this basket of either a small enterprise or a medium enterprise. So it's very imperative that the budget is able to address the concerns of MSMEs in the correct form. I feel the government had done a wonderful thing by coming out with a credit scheme called as the Credit Guarantee Fund Trust for Micro and Small Enterprises, called as CGTMSE, or ECGLS, which was backed by SIDBI. And this was in the time of COVID disruption. So I think it's a time that now they kind of broaden the spectrum, facilitate more and more MSMEs to participate in this. This solves a lot of working capital issue for the small and medium-sized enterprises, and this is, I think, uh, in the when you hear about all the issues of recession and all, I think working capital management is the key thing to handle. And I think if the CGTMS scheme is kind of broadened, and it allow if more companies are allowed to participate in that, it can do wonders, and I think can also help India grow to the next level. Uh,
Hmm,
Second, I think I'll agree with the earlier speakers that
hmm,
simplification in GST is the need of the hour. Along with that, I think rate rationalization is what I feel should happen now very soon, because especially in the segment to which I belong, D2C, I've seen a lot of companies having this asymmetrical input rate versus output rate thing. So I would want that government kind of addresses this, because again, this also leads to a lot of working capital blockages in some form or the other. So I'm looking forward to some kind of rationalization in the rates, and streamlining of this uh, difference between the input and output rates for several of the companies. Uh, Third and the last thing, I think I feel a lot of the PLI schemes do a lot of wonders for small for companies, especially into the startup zones. So I feel we it's important that the schemes are promoted well, and also is able to, again, you need to increase the widen the net and ensure that more companies are able to participate into it, so that it can actually lead to a uh, good turnaround for the overall India Inc.
right.
So basically, my the point is that government can only be an enabler in the ecosystem and facilitate the sustainable growth of the economy by helping build a very robust architecture. But the ground level has to be done by the industries, right? So we would expect. I mean, my expectation is that government should kind of set up that congenial atmosphere, which allows us to kind of move fast.
Sure, sure.
Can
Noted
I
your
just
points.
add one point to what Chirag said?
Sure.
A slightly different thing about MSMEs and the credit offtake. In fact, when you look at the credit growth number of late, it's majorly, driven by MSME credit for whatever reason. I mean, that can be discussed at a later stage. But an important data that has to be kept in mind is, I do not have the 2022 data, but end 2021, the total amount due to the MSMEs from the various government departments, when I looked at the total amount due, was more than the total amount of outstanding credit to the MSME sector as per the RBI data. That's a big challenge, right? I mean, during the pandemic, when they were struggling, now if you expect them to borrow to survive during this situation where they're possibly not as cost efficient as the bigger brothers, that is a challenge. So uh, these are things that really definitely needs to be addressed, I believe.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, Kunal. Thanks for adding that. And in fact, in my observation, there are two theories here. Now, there are a couple of bankers which are actually worried whether there will be NPAs coming out of this MSME or ECLJ scheme, which again, it's guaranteed by government, but again, it will take some time for them to obtain that money from government also.
Absolutely, yes.
But on the other front, if perhaps government would not have given that guarantee to these MSMEs, and if bank would not have given this money, perhaps these MSMEs could not have survived also. So again, how to deal with this far more intelligently. But thanks for adding that, Kunal. And let me move ahead with Mayank and take his opening remarks or the perspective. Mayank, please go ahead.
Yeah, Amol. So I think my co-panelists, I think they've covered most of the points. My view would be, I think the current government has been on for last 8 years. So I would not expect too many changes in the philosophy and the way they have been moving. However, given the landscape change, right, global economy, as you rightly said in the beginning, probably slowing out of our exports, probably global pressure on inflation, interest rates. What I would expect is tweaking around that, and really creating a path for India, the future. I think our G20 presidentship just happened, and now I think government has officially declared that this is our start of Amrit Kal. Now we are 75. So by the time we hit 100 years, next 25 years, we want to be a developed country. So I think all those seeds which have been, I think, sowed 8 years ago should be really like sprinkled with waters and a lot of extra stuff as we keep moving on. So I think few things has been already spoken, but in my view, I think a lot of investment is happening. I think government investment cycle is really pulling really in with highways. I think PLI has done a lot of good, benefit. But I still see people and private at large. I think that investment cycle is yet to kick in a big way in the country. So I would expect government to focus on driving, private investments in the country. From a startup world, if you see last 5 years, probably last 10 years, I think a lot of growth has been driven and influenced by even foreign capital and also domestic capital. But there is clearly, I think, a lot of things we can do domestically. Government has done a lot of positive steps to drive, create some pool of capital uh, within government departments, within funds. But I think more can be done there. What I would expect, there's an entrepreneur sitting in every house in the country. I think there are a lot of, I think, a lot of programs which comes on, a lot of media, TV, which promotes entrepreneurship. In my view, if India has to grow, I think everybody, middle class, low middle class, upper middle class, everybody has to be there. And and with the advent of digitalization across the board, I think a lot of aspects like the PLI should be also focused on services sector because that's right on production link. I think services linked incentives should also be created in my view. I think the other thing has to be consumption. We would expect, I think, globally some sort of a pressures in growth. So, and export-led industries would, of course, see a lot of pressure this year. So, how do we drive, domestic consumption-led growth to balance off, any impact on the export? And I think lastly, I think ease of doing business. I think government continues to do very very good there. What I would suggest is like in corporate we follow an NPS concept. So government should make sure that there's a continuous dialogue between government and enterprises, be startup, be it large format companies, be it SMEs, be it micro entrepreneurs, to see which are the areas. As an example, I think people at a policy level as well as senior level of execution, very very strong guys and trying to do a lot of right things. But as it goes down, at the grassroots level, I think there, of course, could be more trainings, you know,
Right.
so that people who are creating policies and the people who are implementing policies, I think at least intent is same. Otherwise, you
Right.
don't want a witch hunting. Companies who are trying to do right things, taking country to the future, to the developed world,
Hmm.
should not be distracted by small unintentional interpretation of issues.
Hmm. Sure. I think generally
So
startups don't
Amol,
forget.
Amol, just
Sure.
1 second. I know we are a little over time, but I think so. What Kunal said, and I was talking to bankers and economists, and they are saying that a lot of the credit pickup in the economy is working capital driven, which
Right.
is in a way good news that the consumption is coming back, but also not a good news that it is not taken up by capex.
Hmm.
But the factory utilization in the country is back above the 70% levels, and they just feel that as it starts touching the 80% level, you will start seeing capex come through.
Hmm.
So hopefully, if the consumption can be promoted and continued, I think so we will see the capex cycle come back, and that's what the hope is, Amol.
Hmm. Sure, sure. Let's hope that in fact we're having the strongest credit growth ever, but the capex cycle is still going through major challenges. But just wanted to add one thing that the startups will never forget to talk about the private investments. So thank Mayank for adding that part about the private investments. So let me move ahead and also ask the friends, the readers, and the viewers of it CFO. If you have any questions, please share your questions with us to any panelist here. I will try my best to take that questions. Please be specific to the budget so that we can address your query in far more meaningful manner. So let me come back with some specific questions. And Kunal, I will start with you. My
Sure.
question is specifically on the current economic situations. Obviously, we have greater expectations, and we should have expectations from the government, no doubt about it. But when we look at the current situation, where the unemployment rate is not very positive, the interest rates are going up, and perhaps they will go up at least for next 2 quarters, is what we understand. Inflation is still not under control. Considering all this data points, do you think that the government still has a wider scope to use free hands and spend more, or maybe be very liberal in terms of expanding and sharing their expenses heavily this time?
Difficult, to be honest. There's not much of fiscal space left.
Right.
But even when we are talking of the overall economic performance, I do keep on hearing about India being the fastest G20 economy, fastest growing G20 economy. What many people miss out on that is India was the deepest or the deepest contracting economy immediately after the pandemic. Now
Hmm.
when you look at the actual data, we are
Hmm.
barely 4% above the level, pre-pandemic level, 2.5 years ago. So that is not necessarily a sign of a real strong growth, right? I mean, yes. In the global perspective, yes, India was also the fastest growing G20 economy before the pandemic level. It was, a touch and go between India and China.
Hmm.
So now China being in such a bad situation, for whatever reasons,
Hmm.
so India is definitely one of the fastest growing G20 economies. But there are still challenges galore. Employment, as you said. I would like to say that India has actually seen a labor market recession
Hmm.
post the pandemic. Current total employment level is
Hmm.
below the pre-pandemic level.
Hmm.
Again, 2.5 years into recession, our employment level is lower than what was
Hmm.
there before the pandemic. So we have not
Hmm.
added anything. Net, we have not added any employment, and that
Right.
remains a real big challenge for India.
Right.
Coming to even credit growth that we are talking about, in fact, even other than the employment, if you're talking of real wages, rural wages, you're talking of NREGA wages, these are
Hmm.
still negative in real terms.
Hmm.
So now coming to the high credit growth, again, that is the thing that we need to keep in mind. High credit growth is obviously high. Part of it is because of base effect.
Hmm.
Part of it is also when you look at it, the credit growth is not as high when you compare the real compare the nominal GDP growth.
Right.
In fact, India's credit to GDP ratio at this point in time is very close to its decadal low.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
think it's very important to have that perspective. Quite often, when we look at a particular number, headline number, we tend to get swayed by that. But we still need to look at these things in more minute detail to get a better sense. As
Hmm.
even Chirag said, in terms of credit growth, and even Samir pointed out, and that's a reality. It's more for working capital requirement, okay, not for investment. So when I'm looking at RBI data, the large industries credit, you know, at least the month before was below the outstanding credit was below the pre-pandemic level. It just inched up a little bit, by the time we have the December data coming out. Now, the whole point is, so these are companies which are, which have really cleaned up the balance sheet a lot. They are quite well deleveraged. They are waiting to take advantage as the growth recovers. But at this point in time, investment is not happening. And even with regard to so-called improvement in India's capacity utilization rate, the fact is it has gone up. But when you look at the pre-pandemic average capacity utilization level, only once during the pandemic has India's capacity utilization crossed the pre-pandemic average. Now, the average level doesn't really trigger an investment.
Right.
It has to move up and it has to sustain at a higher level. Now, when you look at the September quarter GDP data, demand has been actually quite bad. So, which is the reason we had 3 consecutive months of IIP declining. We had manufacturing contracting in real terms in the September data. Data shows that inventory levels are up and sales to inventory ratio is falling. So part of the capacity utilization has been driven by inventory build-up, hoping that demand will catch up,
Right.
but it hasn't. So you might see going forward some of inventory drawdown happening.
Right.
So it's not as yet in a position that it should have been. So which is why at this point in time I am more bullish on capex, as in infra capex, than business investment. So those are kind of challenges that the economy is facing, and there is obviously no magic wand to get the economy out of the winds. And you just hope for positive policy responses. You just
Right.
hope that you do not move out of the whack, and by the time the global situation improves, India would be back on track. But it's going to be a relatively long haul.
Oh, sure. I think meaningful one, Kunal. In fact, thanks for sharing that economic perspective here. In fact, just to add that even we were not doing great even before going for a pandemic, right? Even before the
Yes,
pandemic, the
yes.
situation was also not that great. So the challenges are not less for sure. So Samir, I let me come to you, Samir. You shared a lot of points. The expectations are obviously in line with every citizen. Obviously, the spend on healthcare should be really high from the government, and there should be a coordination with the health insurance and everything. I absolutely agree with you, because still the tax incentive for under ATD for the health insurance is really very less. But keeping all these things aside, which are obviously the great expectations, as a CFO, I would like you to tell us what are the major challenges on the operations front that you as a CFO face in the industry level, and what do you think the government should do for that, specifically in terms of the policy changes? Maybe GST, maybe other. I know the GST, you don't fall into it, but again, your other sectors fall into it. So apart from GST, or maybe other issues that you want to highlight, that where the government should have a specific attention in this segment from me.
Thanks, Amol. And we have been talking it for quite some time. That unfortunately, healthcare is still not a priority sector in the country. And for a very brief moment during COVID, they came up with certain benefits for a very short duration of time for the hospital industry. Currently, India's beds is way below the WHO standards, given the increase in population that we are having, the increase in disease burden. We were really hoping during the COVID, where private hospitals really stepped up and protected the citizens of this country by not only COVID but also vaccination program. But still, we have not got the healthcare is still not a priority sector. The priority sector helps us get funds like infrastructure, even though we are classified as infrastructure, but we do not get the priority sector status, because of which funds are not deployed by the banks at a cost which is helping to grow. So even though we as a hospital, we are actually setting up 3 more hospitals, greenfields, but we have to negotiate with the banks, and they tend to deploy money as if we are a normal industry. So I think so. One of the things that as a country, if we ever have to become a developed country, even in the next 25 years, our healthcare spends in this country is less than 2% of GDP, and any developed economy, it's in the 8 to 10% range. For us to grow, one is the government will have to continue to spend on the primary and secondary healthcare in the tier 2, tier 3 cities. They started something on the Ayushman Bharat, etc., in terms of getting the insurance policy and spends, but the allocation of budget is so low. It's like, almost like a 40,000. In fact, they reduced the spend after COVID. And this needs to, as Kunal keeps on telling us, the base effect. If you look at the base effect and if you take out COVID, is actually degrown in an economy which has inflation of 10%. So if healthcare has to be any meaningfully for the citizens of the country, I think so this needs to happen. From a GST rationalizations, Amol, healthcare continues to be a GST exempt, but all the input services are GST cost. So it becomes a cost for the hospital. So housekeeping, security, everything has GST. So we cannot charge out, so we cannot claim input. So that becomes a cost for healthcare, which never gets discussed in any forums, because people look at variable cost of delivery and not the fixed cost of delivery. The interest rates for setting up new hospitals, there is no benefit given. So some of these things, if we hope that the government can look at and work along with the private hospitals, where most of the capex is anyways coming through, to help, because India is a huge medical tourism industry as well, healthcare, with all people from Africa, Middle East coming into India. But people from, people still, the wealthy people in Bangladesh, for example, go to Singapore, they go to Turkey and Thailand. So I think so India can definitely become a powerhouse in healthcare. And there is a lot of negative elements sometimes even with the people about private healthcare. That needs to go. Government needs to come up and partner with the private healthcare. One of the reasons that can happen is, for example, insurance policies. All the premiums is GST taxable. Now, sometimes I feel, if the output tax is exempt in healthcare, why is the healthcare premium GST payable? So some of these things, if can be rationalized, and the penetration, because 60% of the spends in India are still out of pocket. The out of pocket spends are there because the insurance companies are not actually giving you benefit of OPD services, which is what the case in the US is, where 95% of the spends are through insurance companies. So instead of looking at hospitals to subsidize cost for the citizens, but look at how we can increase the penetration of insurance policies across the citizens of the country through Ayushman Bharat. For example, it's surprising, Amol. You have, when you're stopped by a traffic police, you're asked for a third party insurance policy and you're ducked, but nobody asks you whether you have a healthcare insurance policy. So some of this mandatory, if that is the reason the carrot and stick approach works. You need to incentivize the people in this country to have a healthcare insurance policy across the sectors, organized, unorganized, so that the out of pocket spends can reduce, and healthcare can continue to invest in high quality healthcare, like we are importing most of the equipments from abroad, including robotic. And hopefully the PLI can take care of that by making the device manufacturing in India at a much lower cost, so that the cost can be passed on to the citizens of the country. So a lot more can be done, Amol, to bring healthcare to a level where at least it becomes 2.5 to 3% of government spends on healthcare and overall 5% of GDP, which according to me after COVID, we have again started not talking about it, but it needs to happen.
No, sure. I think great anecdotes here, Samir, specifically on the health side. And I could see there is a big mismatch here. In fact, I have been covering this insurance sector. And what I also learned is, because banking and finance is my core sector, so that I have been reporting on. Earlier there was 12.36% of service tax on the insurance policies, specifically on the health side or something. GST came in, it became 18%. So
Correct.
in which way there was, no more takers for the insurance policies. Now it became 18%, so numbers are still, very less. So I think these mismatches should somehow be clarified and, attended by the government. So thanks for adding that, Samir. Let me move my focus to Chirag now. And Chirag, you are also opening lots of stores. I can see that. Being a startup company, what is the major challenge that you face, while opening the stores and, building it online, offline business model? And what is it that specifically that you think that the government can help you with in terms of relaxing certain parts where it will help you to maybe create a sustainable business model, or maybe, to make it very precise, to build your online, offline model? What are the incentives that you think the government should have for you?
I think one of the biggest concerns are particular segment, which is the apparel segment, or especially in the D2C space, is going through is The GST rates. All my products are generally in the tax bracket of 5%, but all my input consumptions, which is primarily services, again comes at 18%. So like Samir mentioned, that's the thing that government has to address, because otherwise it becomes very difficult to kind of keep on incurring this heavy working capital blockages every time you have to kind of fulfill and deploy those funds to ensure that you are able to uh, balance out that gap between the input and output prices. So that's, I think, one of the biggest thing which which my sector particularly undergoes, and kind of is a concern that we would hope government or GST Council would address soon. Second, I think, is in the textile segment, the contract. I mean, there's a specific scheme introduced by government called as Section 80 JJAA. This allows a deduction to the SSC on payouts done to the resources or workers who have been added new in the last financial year, basically. But this is now applicable only to the employees who are there on your payroll. Now, textile industry has this. They do a lot of contract manufacturing, so they have a lot of workers on the contracted payrolls. Unfortunately, this scheme is not applicable for that part of resources. So if this, I mean, when there is an intent to kind of help a particular segment, if this can be passed on to the correct specific set of audiences and a correct set of resources, I think that can do a lot of wonders. So there's a need to kind of revisit the scheme, and there's something that basically broaden the net so that more people can take benefit out of this. Uh, Apart from this, I think you rightly pointed out that we are an online and offline player. So in the online space, I think most online companies are kind of still struggling to service their customers in the north and northeastern region uh, in time. That's because of the poor freight corridor towards the northeast part of India. I think that's something that needs to be addressed on priority. There are things which are happening. We've been seeing development of express highways and all of that, but yet things are not commissioned in the northeastern region. So hopefully we'll see some good traction coming up in the budget as well as in the coming years in this space. So that would ease a lot of issues pertaining to the logistics to the northeastern region.
No, sure. I think quite meaningful thoughts, Chirag. Mayank, let me be, specific on the tax front and the fund size that startups are looking at. So obviously, government has been praising startups and uh, sharing their views in terms of how they can support startups. So my question is to you in two parts. One is, if we specifically, think that the ESOP should be similar to equity, what difference do you think it will make? And more on the domestic pool of capital for the startups. What, how do you think that the government can help here?
Yeah. So Amol, as you know, right, the entire startup world is based on talent. People with technology as technology is actually changing the world.
Right.
So the new age companies are using technology to redo every industry possible on earth. Now, so if you see, the backbone of startups are human capital. Now, ESOPs, of course, are used to motivate and incentivate the employees in a startup. Now, what happens is when any ESOP gets exercised, the salary taxation gets levied, and if you keep on holding on, and the value keeps going on, while the equity long-term tax of a listed company may be even 10%, a short term maybe 15%. However, in a ESOP world, it actually tantamounts to almost to salary tax, which at the highest level is almost as high as 40 to 43%. So treating it as actually an equity, and probably having similar rules, kind of equity, will remove one big hurdle from the minds of every startup employee in the country, which is, how do I treat my ESOPs? So in my view, I think that's a big one. If it doesn't impact any collections, any revenue collections. It just incentivize the entire community. So I would recommend government to think about it and actually you know not classify ESOP exercise amount as salary tax, but rather as an equity. On the second piece around domestic pool, so if you see country today, and if you see the top investors in startup world, I think if you see a lot of the top investors are actually global funds. There is an increasing amount of domestic capital emerging. A lot of business houses are creating pools. Government has also taken a lot of good initiatives, but we do have larger enterprises, in form of EPFO, LIC, lot of other government pools, sitting out under control of state or central government. Like if you take examples of other countries, like if you take Singapore, if you take Canada, there are government sovereign funds who actually go to countries like India or US or elsewhere and
Right.
find out promising companies and do invest. Now, if other countries' government funds can come in and invest in India, I think the first one should be government funds in India to support the domestic enterprise. And I know there are some policy measures around the way current laws are written. It also could be process aspects of how do we create that. But I think government should create some sort of a sizable fund and do encourage investments in the startup world. Anything which is using technology, like if you take China as an example, among their core government program, AI and ML is kind of a big focus area for next 20 years for China. And
Right.
government is part of the government program to invest in AI and ML and associated companies. I believe there's a huge need, and it can be a really impactful if in India, state and central governments can actually learn from some of these countries and start implementing in the country.
Sure, noted your points.
Amol, I just wanted to add to what Mayank is saying, and it's really fantastic points. It's about phantom shares to be classified as stocks, but among the other things that can also drive some credit growth in the country, Amol, is today if you are a foreign-owned controlled companies where some of the startups and companies which get invested by private equity become, you cannot raise domestic equity, domestic borrowing for buying equity shares in an Indian company. Now, I do not know why would an Indian bank not able to participate in acquisition of shares if the diligence is done and all the. But you can get an FPI money from abroad and invest in India. So I somehow some of these FEMA regulations also needs to be relooked at for growing and to make it easy, because it is not easy to get FPI money and list the NCD in India and then use that money for acquisition of shares in the country. So some of these measures for foreign-owned controlled companies in India, if they can use domestic capital for acquisition of shares, will also lead a huge fillip to the banking industry and also drive more acquisitions in the country and more capital in the country. So I just wanted to add to what Mike said here.
Yeah, thanks, Amir. And if I may just add, Amol, just one point around, let's say, for the auto industry which I represent. So if you see, like if you compare India versus anywhere in the world, we are 22 cars per 1,000 people in India, versus let's say US is 850 per 1,000 people. So we are the most underpenetrated auto kind of a country globally. Even China is upward of 200. Now, with the government mission of creating highways, and our minister, of course, committing in next 2 3 years, our roads will be better than probably the developed world. I think government needs to power and supplement road development with mobility. So and that will actually create economic activity in a huge way. Now, how that can be done is one, I think the biggest piece in India, I think car owning is actually a very big thing, and it's a biggest durable asset any family in India owns, especially in the lower and middle class or lower middle class families. So government should come up with some policies to probably devise it as a priority sector lending, at least for the smaller vehicles. May supplement it with sustainable practices. Maybe EV, if you buy a bike or a car, give in addition to GST benefits some income tax benefits as well. I think that should help really drive it. And the entire ecosystem, if you enable financing of cars, it will actually open up. If I quote a number in used car, the percentage of cars used cars finance in country is like really small. It's just 18% of used cars in India get financed, and part of it is availability of credit. Part of it is just it's not a practice sector lending. So if we can unlock some of this stuff, it will help us recycle cars as well. We'll go long term towards sustainability of of our environment as well. So I would recommend if we can do that as well. Last thing I would tell you, like for our insurance business, we have we have thousands of agents in the country in tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 cities. I think there's a huge need as countries moving toward financialization, with insurance, with banking, Jandhan, a lot of tech stack government has laid out. I think we must lay out a upskilling of our of our general population. A financial literacy drive should be created where how to take an insurance, how to take a loan, how to make investments. I think those will be very softer aspects. If government can do it, can also create a bottoms up impact on on overall financialization of the economy.
Sure,
And
I think.
just a point with
Hmm.
what Manka said regarding the car industry. In some of the categories, the taxes are virtually the same as the economic cost of production of the car. So you're talking of double the price individuals have to pay for ownership of a car. I mean, it's not surprising that the penetration cannot be, as R.C. Bhargava said, India will take probably 60 years to reach China's current level of penetration.
Hmm. Sure, noted your points. I think there are a couple of questions, but most of them are in general, not specific to budget. But this question, I think, is still I will take and I will recommend. I will ask readers and viewers to please shoot any specific question you have. We have just last 3 to 4 minutes left. Kunal, do you mind taking this question? The question is, do you think this is going to be a budget which will focus on big bang reforms, or this is going to be a pragmatic budget?
Pragmatic for sure. There cannot be big bang reforms approaching the election. There cannot be. It has to be more of a budget, circumspect budget, trying to match, as I said, populist urge with some sense of pragmatism. So
Right.
no, in a certain sense, this cannot be a big
Hmm.
bang budget per se. But as long as we do not take any policy missteps, I will be more than happy.
Right. Sure. I mean, it can't be make or break considering the background where
Absolutely.
we came from,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So sure. So let me take this last but a very important question. Obviously, we all have dozens of expectations from the budget, but what is more important is what should not be there. Also, what we don't like to see is also important, right? Because I still remember the retrospective amendments. If are there, everyone will go for a different league altogether. So let's not expect those kind of stuff. So maybe Samir, I will start from you, and just share maybe the things that you would not like to see in the budget.
No increase in taxation, for sure. No increase in complexity of compliance, and I think so. Kunal pointed it out, and Chirag also. Ease of doing income tax or a GST compliance. So hopefully, no new forms. I think so. Everybody's still struggling with the AIS that has come through, and everybody has got notices around exact matching that number. So I know government has done a huge amount of big data analytics, but has to from a compliance standpoint make it easier.
Hmm.
So I would not like to see new taxes, and would like to see government continue to push up on progress on growth, which is going to be the solution for our problems for us.
Sure. Mayank?
So I think Amol, government is doing a lot of good things. I think the one thing which I said I will suggest for a few years it has been expected is probably looking at the salaried folks tax rates. So I would love the government to not ignore that. To and Samira said in the beginning, at least match it with the highest corporate tax rate of individuals. So if they don't do it, I would I would be disappointed. I would love to see that happening.
Sure. Chirag?
Yeah, same what Samir said. I don't want to see any surprises by any increases in the taxation rate, especially with the kind of which I already explained that there's already a asymmetrical input output rates. I don't want that now. Instead of addressing that, I don't want any further surprises there. Also, what I feel is, I know when it comes to ease of doing business in India, it's see, I mean, for a company to the ease of doing business is categorized in 3 steps. One is it should be easy to start, it should be easy to operate, and third is it should be easy to wind up in case there is a need. So I think first point has been very well addressed by the government. That we've seen wonderful digitization happening, and to do a GST registration, for instance, is it's now so simple, right? I mean, you can just apply online and kind of get the number tomorrow itself. So ease to start anything is very is sorted. But I think the point number 2 and point number 3, which is the ease to operate and ease to wind up, is something that is still a big challenge. So I don't want budget to come out with surprises which will further complicate operations by when what Samir rightly said, that any kind of procedural complexities or something which kind of just complicates life and kind of also confuses people around.
Sure. Kunal?
Yeah, just to add to what Chirag has said, I mean, you talk to the small businesses trying to close down, for whatever reason, it's a nightmare. I've been talking to quite a few of them. And my God, I mean, they said it's better to let it be like this. I incur some expenses, but closing is such a big headache. So yes, hopefully, nothing that complicates things further. For me, from an economics angle, please no mindless populism as the elections are approaching. There is a tendency, there will be a tendency. The populism can come in various ways. You may not understand it at the looking at the things, but when you read the fine print, you just still get to see that. So I would hope there's no mindless populism, which eventually results in competitive populism across the states. As election comes, so that's really critical. I mean, if you are talking of supporting growth, it's very very important. Because what happens is the moment you get into this competitive populism, and given that fact, we cannot really stretch our resources, eventually your capex takes a hit. And historically, that is something I have consistently seen. Any stretch on the resources, eventually your capex gets hit, because capex is more of an orphan, as I say. There's nobody pushing for it. Populism has many parents, but capex is sort of an orphan. So if you do not get the space, you do not go for it. So no mindless populism, please. I mean, that's very very critical.
No, sure. I think I'm done with the questions, and the time is also up. But quickly, maybe 1 or 2 last minutes, and anybody wants to quickly add on this particular question is on the ease of doing business. So we have been talking a lot about it, but anybody wants to expect something on the ease of doing business side, because at one side we are saying that China is still not very aggressive, and maybe it will come back very soon. But till then, India is a country which can take more benefit out of it. Government is also talking about manufacturing side. So on large level, is there anything that the government should do specifically to boost ease of doing business, or on the ease of doing business side?
Can I add one point here?
Sure.
See, on the PLI, it's a good scheme to have.
Yeah.
But the fact is, PLI is still more of subsidies and incentives. Now, incentives are more of fickle friends. We are talking of China plus one strategy. Now, if there is competitive incentive, it will not take a firm to go out of a country and settle elsewhere. What is critical, if you look at it, if most of the foreign manufacturers, if they are showing interest on India, it's more for assembling, not for manufacturing, right? So very clearly, India is not a go-to destination for foreign manufacturers if they're looking for a China plus one strategy.
Right.
I think what is critical is to, incentives are important at certain point in time, but that cannot be the only solution. What is important to ensure that, the business environment remains, competitive enough and important enough for the companies to come into India despite of what's happening, right? So that is, I think, is critical, which is where we need to see consistent reforms on two major, inputs of production, which is labor and land. So we need to see continuous, reforms in this. But these are politically very sensitive areas of reforms. So I do not expect big bang reforms, but there has to be consistent reforms on these two aspects. And eventually we reach to a point, maybe 5, 6, 7 years down the line, where things are really much, much better as compared to what it is now. So no big bang reforms possibly, but we cannot take our eyes or feet off the pedal in terms of reforming these two very important factors of production, which is land and labor.
Also,
Amol, I think so. India is
Sure.
now around 63rd out of the 190 countries in terms of ease of doing business. I think so. It's performed one of the best out of the 10 countries. So I wanted to be starting on the positive note that things change slowly, but they are changing. I think so. As Kunal rightly pointed out, the land and labor needs to be continue to reform. I think so. The other thing is the IBC code. I think so. We didn't discuss this in this, but the IBC code needs to be, fast tracked. It's too slow. The NCLT process takes forever. I think so. If the IBC code can be strengthened and fast tracked, a lot of the NCLT benches remain empty. So the judicial system needs to be reformed as well, so that there is a faster pace of delivery, because justice delayed is justice denied. And if India can, start the judicial reform, I think so it will be great for getting in a lot of FDI in the country, and decriminalization of law, so that the business can happen without fear of going to jail. There are lots of laws in which lots of powers are given for, putting people behind bars. Not all that is required. So some of this can help, ease of doing business without fear. We are a great entrepreneurial country. I think so. There's a great entrepreneurial spirit in the country. It needs to be rekindled. It continuously needs to be, focused upon, and continue to invest in infrastructure, 5G rollouts, and the highways, and to make this country great. So, Amol, I really think that India is on the right path. But rest assured that ease of doing business 63rd doesn't mean that India will not get FDI. India will continue to get FDI, and hopefully with the bond, if we get listed on the bond space, there will be some few of long-term money also coming into the country. So some of the positive things I wanted to leave the audience behind, that all is not doom and gloom, and there's lots of positive green lights on the other side.
Absolutely, Samir. Absolutely.
I'll just add into what Kunal and Samir mentioned about
Sure,
the
Chirag.
land and labor. There's also, I think, along with land and labor reforms, also the need is there for the power reforms, because if you look at the way our power, if you look at any cities beyond metros, there's a huge crisis in terms of power, and that actually is impacting the supply chain. So there's a if the power needs can be addressed, that would kind of ease down this entire supply chain management and would smoothen down the supply chain for lot many companies. So that's, I think, also is something that what I feel government already is taking it head on and will be addressing it. But this is something which I feel, along with land and labor, power is something what we should be focusing on.
And just
Just
last one,
one
just to add,
Yes, please.
just
Yeah,
just to
sorry.
add, I think IBC is kind of an extreme situation when you are trying to have somebody in a bankruptcy mood. But I think general litigation, like expediting that piece, I think that's a big one. Because if you file any law, and if I see my litigation list across any company I've worked in past, that keeps going adding and adding and adding, and we don't solve the litigations. So I think government puts a pressure, be it in taxes, be it in commercial side, be it in civil side. I think that will just help us put a kind of a overall guardrail on the expiry time limits for each of the matters of dispute anywhere in the country.
True.
Sure. I think noted your points, Mayank, Chirag, Samir, and Kunal. I think a great rejoinder as well. Wish you could have some more time, but I think it's almost an hour now. And I think I also wanted to take a couple of questions on climate, but there is no time. I realized that we should have a specific episode on the climate finance, or maybe a climate side itself.
Yeah.
But absolutely, quite a meaningful and realistic thoughts. I hope, the Office of Finance Ministry look into what we discussed here and at least adopt, or embrace a couple of points for sure. And more importantly, what should not be there in the budget, on that front, they, look at this episode. So Kunal, Samir, Mayank, Chirag, thank you so much for your time and your perspective that you offered here. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning into this special series of ETCF on the budget. Stay tuned for next Friday at 2 p.m. as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amol.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.